us tonight on our next Broken Heroes Bible study. We are journeying through the New Testament now. We've come through the Old Testament and we've talked about several different characters. Tonight we're going to be talking about Simon Peter. And we've been through characters such as Moses, Abraham, Ruth, Judas, which was not really a hero. He was just broken. Last week we talked about Mary Magdalene. So tonight we're looking at the life of Peter and who he was, why he was instrumental in the church, in the founding of the infancy of the church. And so that's where we're at tonight. So who is Simon Peter? What do we know about him so far?
I mean, he's a fisherman.
All right.
He has a brother.
He has a brother. He was married.
He's married.
He was married, had a mother-in-law that Jesus healed.
Yeah.
She had a fever, right?
Yep.
Jesus heals her. Actually, he brings her in, which he's a good son-in-law. Not just a son-in-law, he is a good son-in-law, and he wants his mother-in-law to be healed.
Mm-hmm.
How many mother-in-laws can say that? Can your mother-in-law say that? No, don't answer that. We're not going to answer that. So we're it got very awkward real quick.
Not laughing at those
Hey, I love my mother-in-law. She loves me. I think she does. Anyways, he's a fisherman. He's married. He's got a very common life. He's not an educated person. He's not like the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul, he's an educated person. Mm-hmm. He's got degrees. He's got letters behind his name, basically. That's not Peter. Peter is just common. What do we know about these fishermen? What kind of people were they? They were.
I mean, they're roughnecks, for lack of
edges, yeah.
like a term. They're hardworking men that would, make a good living. But it was definitely hard work. It definitely was something that, was good for the family. But overall, they weren't considered, like you said, upper class citizens. So.
Okay. Yeah, they would fish the Sea of Galilee, and so they came from a region of Israel that was probably more, country bumpkin. People even made fun of the way they talked.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of resonate with who these guys are. If you come from South Georgia, you talk with an accent. You talk funny. At least some people say that. I think they talk funny.
Everybody else talks
funny. But that's kind of the idea. That these guys that Jesus was bringing around him, they were not the elite. They were not the powerful. They were not the educated. They were not the wealthy. They were very common, country bumpkin type guys, hard workers that Jesus was bringing around him to change the world. So they were fishermen. Anything else we know about him?
He was quick to talk and slow to think.
Okay.
He made a lot of quick decisions without thinking about it. Like we talked about earlier, he jumped on the soldier that grabbed Jesus, chopped off his ear.
Yeah.
He suggested there be a resurrection of tabernacles with Elijah, Moses, and of course.
So that was at the Transfiguration.
Yeah.
Which brings us to another thing about Simon Peter. He was not just part of the 12. He was part of the.
He's part of three.
Like a three.
Yeah.
Inner circle.
And he was definitely probably the leader of the 12 in a lot of ways. I mean, the only other scripture that argues it is John, which was written by John. So that's a little bit of, But everyone else pretty much says Peter is the leader of this group of the 12.
All right. So he kind of runs his mouth. He's part of these 12 disciples, and then he's part of an inner three. You mentioned the Transfiguration. There were other places where he was part of that inner circle. Where Jesus raises the girl from the dead in Mark chapter 5. He's part of that group that gets to see that miracle.
Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah, and that was the next thing, the Garden of Gethsemane. He was there when Jesus was arrested, and just like you said just a minute ago, he chopped off the ear. What was the guy's name? Malchus? Was the guy's name Malchus? So he chops off his ear, and Jesus has to stop all that and put the guy's ear back on, basically.
He even bragged that he would never deny Jesus or betray him.
Yeah.
The Bible said he boasted it.
Okay, so we've talked about, when we talked about Judas, we talked about Simon Peter, because he was the other one who denied Christ, and Jesus even told him he would. He didn't do it just once; he did it three times. He said, "You're going to deny me 3 times before the rooster crows," and so we see that that's part of his brokenness, right? There's a lot of good that he sees. There's a lot of good that he's a part of, but the brokenness that we see in Simon Peter is he's a hothead. He shoots his mouth off. Do y'all know anybody like that? I'm not calling names. I'm just saying. I mean, and when you think about Jesus who Jesus brought around him, the type of people Jesus brought around him, what does that make you think?
He wasn't trying to get the best of the best around him. He was kind of surrounding himself with everyday guys.
Real people?
Yeah, real people. I mean, people who was themselves and didn't try to pretend to be somebody that they wasn't. And even some of them got caught in their ways, like Peter, when it came to denying and being quick to spout off at the mouth. But then again, Jesus showed, I think, a huge amount of grace when it came to Peter as well.
So they weren't spiritual superstars. Sometimes we like to think that, right? We push these people up in the Bible. We push them up. Oh man, if I got a chance to walk with Jesus, my life would be really. They were very real, common life. So they're not superstars in any sense. But Jesus changes their life, and Jesus takes them as they are. He takes all the good and all the bad that they bring with them, and Jesus works in that and has a lot of grace for their failures. He has a lot of grace for their faults and the things that they just... I think it might have was a little frustrating for Jesus at times. I think we see Jesus saying, "Hey, do you not get what I'm saying? Do you not... are you still not picking up on what I'm trying to lay down here?" And so Jesus has a lot of grace, though, still for these guys, that he pulls around him, and he allows them to be a part of his mission, to bring change and to bring love and to bring God's purpose and God's mission to the world. What about his name? We were talking about his name a little earlier. What about the name Simon Peter? So what do we know about that?
The original rock.
The original rock. Dwayne Johnson's got nothing on Simon Peter.
Peter Johnson.
Yeah. What do we know?
I think, he kind of goes through 3 different names in the Bible. He has Simon, and he has Peter, and he has Caiaphas at the end where Paul calls him this, or Cephas.
Yes.
At the end where Paul calls them this, and they're all different languages, and they're different. I'm going to butcher it, but you got Simon is the original, would be the Hebrew. Peter would be the Greek. No, and Cephas or Caiaphas would be.
Caiaphas is actual. That is a different. That's a different. Cephas is or I've even heard it pronounced
Aramaic.
Kepha.
Aramaic, right?
Aramaic.
Aramaic.
And
So, and he's found it. All 3 of those names are found in the Bible for him, and he's referenced that way. But like Justin said, he's known really for Jesus is calling him the Rock later in his ministry.
Yeah, and with this, I've heard a lot of people talk about this that Peter is the rock, and where that comes from. So let's just read real quick. This is it right here in Matthew 16 and 17. Basically, Peter makes this profession of faith, and Jesus responds to this profession. He's like, "Hey, where are you going to go?" He's like, "Where else are we going to go? You are the Christ." And this is what it says in Matthew 16. It says, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, That is the Greek. That means rock, Petros, Peter. And on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. So we see Jesus, basically he's referencing this play on his name, this play on the name Peter as rock. What do you think he's talking about there?
I think he was going to be foundational when it came to establishing the Pentecostal church.
Just the Pentecostal church?
Just, well, I mean, and not just the church as a whole, but I mean, when he was part of the Pentecost time. But in Acts chapter 10, it said he was also the first to take the gospel to the Gentiles, which was anybody who wasn't Jewish.
That's a good point. In Acts, he has this vision. Do you remember that, where he has the vision and
of the blanket of all the meats and stuff he can eat.
sees all these animals, and it's like, take, and the word comes to him to take and kill. And he's like, hey, I can't do that. This stuff is unclean. And the message comes back to him, says, hey, don't call unclean or common what God has made holy. And so he does. He kind of has this first vision of Gentiles being brought in. And we see the fulfillment or the execution of that through the life of Paul. Paul becomes a missionary to the Gentiles. But this name Peter, it means rock. This Aramaic term Cephas, I've heard it said different ways. I've heard it said that he was a rock of this foundation of faith being built, the church being built. But I've also, as I was reading a rabbi a little earlier, and he was saying that this term was also, it was kind of a term that they would poke fun at. It's hey, you're a rock, was not necessarily, hey man, you're like the Rock, Dwayne Johnson rock. Hey, you're like dumb as a rock. That's how that term can also be taken. And I can kind of think, you know what? Yeah, he did some things where he seemed like he was dumb as a rock.
It goes back to when we said he was kind of quick with his mouth or quick to do things without thinking. I mean, that's kind of dumb if you think about it.
Yeah, and so there's, when I read this part here in Matthew chapter 16, and I see that he just says, I tell you that you are Peter, that you are a rock, but you have made something profound. You've made a profound statement. And I think it's less, for me, I see this being less about Peter. I know a lot of people want to view this verse as saying, well, this verse is about he's building this on the foundation of who Peter was, and Peter became the first pope, and he became the leader of the church. I take it less as being about Peter and more being about the profession. Mm-hmm. I think that's what it is. For me, that's what I get out of that, is that this is about the profession that Peter made, where Jesus says, you know what, people think that you're dumb as a rock, but you know what, you've said something very profound. You've said something that is true. You've said something that is solid when you said that I'm the Christ. And I think he's just kind of in twofold ways saying, I know what people have said about you, but this is what I say about you. I recognize the faith in you. I recognize the trust that you have in me. And I think that's for me, that's uplifting. Mm-hmm. For me, I like how Jesus draws him in, because Jesus continues to draw Simon Peter to him. How do we see that play out? Where else do we see that happen?
Well, the account of him walking on water.
Okay.
He's out on a boat, and they think they see a ghost, and Peter says, you know what, if it's you, Lord, let me come to you. And right. So I think the Bible, King James says, bid me to come to you. And then he steps out, and Jesus says, come on. And we use that story in a whole lot of different ways. But I think it was just Peter trying to prove something to himself, and trying to prove to. Well, it was Jesus' way of drawing him to him, in a sense.
I think what you're talking about is Jesus after the tomb. He's talking to Mary Magdalene, and he says, "Go to the disciples and Peter." He mentions Peter by name. There's nowhere in Scripture that Peter is not a disciple. Like, there's nowhere else that Peter's left the discipleship. There's nothing like that. So for him to call Peter out, he's drawing Peter back by name because he knows Peter made mistakes. He knows that this person is a rock. And again, like what we talked about before, his hot-headedness, and you see that later with him and Paul arguing and stuff like that. And you see that his hot-headedness and his quickness does get him in trouble, but his zeal always pushes him to spread the gospel and spread stuff. And Jesus is calling him back and says, do not run with your guilt. Like, don't take this and go. Come back to me. I can forgive you, and I still can use you for good.
And we see after that, after he calls him back, reveals, hey, listen, this is me in the body. I'm revealing my resurrection to you. But not only does he call him back and gives him forgiveness, he commissions him, right? What does he say? He brings him back and says, feed my sheep.
Feed my sheep.
Feed my lambs, feed my sheep. And I know it's kind of this back and forth between him and Jesus. But Jesus not only forgives him, but then he commissions him. And I think that is huge for us. That God just doesn't want to forgive you of your sins. He wants to bring us back to him in restored relationship with him. And not only restore relationship between us and him, but he also wants to restore the commission that he's given us. He remissions us and says, listen, you're not here just by chance. You're not here just to take up space. You're here for a reason. And so go fulfill the kingdom work. And that's what we see. I think that's what we see with the life of Peter. Peter is definitely a broken character. He's definitely a broken person in so many ways. But God works through that. Jesus, his grace and his mercy, his molding, his just bringing him back continues to just use him and restore him. So that's the life of Simon Peter, a broken hero that we've looked at. Guys, anything else you want to add to it before we close out here? All right. Thank you for joining us tonight. We hope that you've been enjoying these Bible studies. You can catch all these online either at Facebook or at YouTube. There is a link on our website at newliferh.com. You can go back and check those out. But all these are recorded, and you can go back and watch these and catch up and see where we've been. Thank you, and we hope you have a great evening.